Stanley Kubrick is one of the most enigmatic directors ever to exist, the subject of countless speculations and conspiracy theories, due in part to some of his films' ambiguous nature, his preference for privacy, and reluctance to publicity. Because of this, there are many misconceptions and unknown facts about the man. Here is a brief list of 10 things you did not know about Stanley Kubrick. Fact number 1. Throughout his childhood, Kubrick had two passions. One was photography, a skill which would prove invaluable when he started making films. But another was chess. Taught to him by his father, Kubrick was an avid and adept chess player, and the game was more useful than just a simple hobby, as during a brief period of unemployment in his early 20s, when he was trying to establish himself as a filmmaker, he eked out money by hustling chess games. And even after he started working full-time as a director, he found use for his chess-playing skills when it came time to establish who was boss to his actors. As an example, he would continually beat the actor George C. Scott at the game, who would often disagree with Kubrick's direction. So checkmating him may have been Kubrick's way of getting him in line. Same with Shelley Duvall on the set of The Shining and Arliss Howard on the set of Full Metal Jacket. And besides that, the game would make several appearances throughout his filmography, such as in The Killing and 2001, A Space Odyssey. Fact number 2. One fact that is well known about Kubrick is his lack of a Best Director Academy Award, an oft-cited omission when discussing how flawed the Academy's award system is. He was nominated 4 times for Dr. Strangelove, 2001, A Space Odyssey, A Clockwork Orange, and Barry Lyndon, but lost all of them. Though what is not mentioned as often is the fact that he did technically win an Oscar, only someone else took the credit, and he also won another for work he did not do. Let's begin with the first one and go all the way to the 60s when he took over director duties for Spartacus, after the original director, Anthony Mann, was fired due to disagreements with the film's star and the man who was pretty much in charge of it, Kirk Douglas. Kubrick was then in his early 30s and had not yet become the director powerhouse he is known as today, his most notable and iconic films still ahead of him, and had only modest successes behind him, being most likely hired due to working with Douglas on his previous film, Paths of Glory, and because the actor believed he could be more easily controlled. But even then, Kubrick demanded complete control, in particular over the film's cinematography, a fact that irked the film's actual cinematographer Russell Matty, a veteran of the craft who had been in the industry for almost 3 decades at that point, working on some pretty notable films such as Orson Welles' Touch of Evil, meaning he would have been behind this famous shot. Yet despite Matty's experience trumping his, Kubrick would take over the cinematography, butting heads with Matty, which culminated with him telling the man, "You can do your job by sitting in your chair and shutting up. I'll be the director of photography." And in his defense, Kubrick must have done a good job since the film won an Academy Award for Best Cinematography. But since Russell Matty was credited as cinematographer and not Kubrick, it was he who received the prize. Though Kubrick did win an Oscar in his name, only this time it was he who took the credit, despite not doing the work he was awarded for. The year is 1969 and 2001 A Space Odyssey is up for several Oscars, most of whom it will lose, save for Best Special Effects. There was a problem, however. The Academy only allowed for there to be 3 recipients for each win at the time, and the film had 4 special effects supervisors, each of whom deserved a prize. So to keep them from fighting over who would give up on their statuette, Kubrick claimed it himself, winning his sole Oscar. Fact number 3. Stanley Kubrick had a lot of unrealized film projects, such as his Napoleon biopic, Holocaust drama, and Pinocchio-inspired sci-fi film. Though among them is a film not mentioned as often, maybe because Kubrick was glad he never made it, a western starring Marlon Brando. It was after the release of Paths of Glory that Kubrick received a call from the actor, who was so impressed by his film, The Killing, that he wanted to work with the up-and-coming director. Though even before the scriptwriting phase, his potential team-up faced several issues, one being that Brando had no idea what film he wanted to make. They would workshop a few ideas, all of which Brando rejected, until the actor happened upon a western story named The Authentic Death of Henry Jones, which was then retitled One-Eyed Jacks. Their partnership would end after several disagreements over the script, which Brando had complete control over, and also the casting, as Brando was more interested in filling the film with women he was into, as well as former lovers of his. Kubrick would create the picture, the script at this point being such a mess that he no longer knew what the film was about. It was at this point that he was more interested in his adaptation of Vladimir Nabokov's novel, Lolita, and with no one else in mind, Brando took his role as the sole arbiter of the film's creative side to its logical extreme, and became its director, turning in a film that was such a financial disappointment that Brando was never allowed in the director's chair again. It is probably for the best that this partnership never happened, as it is easy to imagine that Kubrick's and Brando's contentious relationship would carry over when filming began. I mean, can you imagine the control freak that Kubrick was, clashing heads with the often defiant Brando, who was known for refusing directions? It would perhaps have made for some good drama, but Kubrick's energies were best spent elsewhere. Fact number 4. Films often change dramatically during production, even up until they are released, and Stanley Kubrick's filmography is no exception, as some of his movies have cut or altered endings that some might find quite surprising. First would be Lolita, one of his more controversial pictures due to its questionable depiction of a relationship between the teenaged Dolores Hayes or Lolita and her middle-aged stepfather, Humbert Humbert. Yeah, and you can imagine that back in the 60s, the challenges of trying to bring such a story on screen were nigh on insurmountable. So Kubrick had to censor much of the story's most lurid elements. One challenge in particular was trying to get code certification, as the movie was made while Hollywood was still following the very puritanical and strict Hays Code that prohibited even normal consensual sexual acts. And one suggestion to get around this problem, given to him by a production manager, was to have Lolita marry her abuser, because somehow the censors would have a problem with child protection, but not child marriage. Thankfully that never happened and Humbert Humbert dies instead. Another more likely and light-hearted ending would be a cut scene from his next film, Dr. Strangelove, which was supposed to have ended with everyone in the war room taking part in a pie fight. And this sequence was actually filmed, the cast throwing thousands of pies made of shaving cream at one another over the course of a week. This was however cut out, rewritten and reshot, Kubrick believing that seeing people having too much fun was not funny, and instead opted for the ending we have today. A Clockwork Orange could perhaps have ended quite differently as well, had he read another version of the book it was adapted from. The film was based on a book with the same name, written by Anthony Burgess, but there were actually two versions of it, the American one, which Kubrick had read, and the British one, which had an extra chapter where we see Alex decide to reform and abandon his criminal ways. It was only deep into production that Kubrick became aware of this, but even if he had read it, it is doubtful he would have adapted this final chapter, as he felt it did not fit tonally, so the film retained its more cynical ending. And finally, The Shining once included a whole scene at the end which was cut out while the film was being shown, as Kubrick decided to excise it while distribution had started, so projectionists had to cut the bit of film containing this ending and send it to Warner Brothers Studios. This scene would have shown Wendy Torrance in the hospital talking to Mr. Ullman, who tells her that Jack's body was never found before giving Danny a similar tennis ball he was seen playing with in the film. So whether it be before, during or after filming, Kubrick was never afraid to radically change his films to achieve the best results. Fact number 5. Kubrick's films have covered a vast range of locales, whether it be America's highways in Lolita, a dystopian future England, the vast emptiness of space, or a Vietnamese town. But quite surprisingly, after making Spartacus, Kubrick would move to Britain and henceforward make all his films there, always demanding to work near to home, save for a brief period while filming Barry Lyndon in Ireland. This means that from Lolita to Eyes Wide Shut, every movie was shot in Britain. So films like Lolita, Dr. Strangelove, The Shining, Full Metal Jacket and Eyes Wide Shut all had their American settings fabricated in studio. Kubrick going so far on the production of Eyes Wide Shut that he created a fake New York City. And even while making Full Metal Jacket, Kubrick refused to film the movie's Vietnam sequences in the country itself, or any place that looked like it, and instead turned an old gasworks that was set for demolition into a Vietnamese town. The reasons for refusing to go too far away from home are numerous, but amongst them is perhaps fact number 6. He was deathly afraid of flying. After flying to London to begin shooting Lolita, Kubrick would never step aboard a plane again, traveling by boat instead. And this is somewhat surprising considering that he at one point studied for a pilot's license. But that was at the heart of his fear of flying, as during his first solo flight, Kubrick staggered into the air due to a lack of power and came near to crashing. One reason, as told by a friend of his, is that the plane had 2 magnetos, one of which Kubrick had forgotten to turn on. According to Kubrick himself, it was the switch on the magneto that was at fault, as it stuck. After this, he would research into pilot error and swear off planes for good. Fact number 7. Kubrick is well known for his extreme level of control while making his films. But what is less known is that even after a film's completion, he still demanded control while his movies were shown in theaters, as he would check on movie theaters to see if their projectors and sound systems were up to snuff, and if they were not, he would send an engineer to fix them to his liking. This may seem like a manifestation of obsessive behavior, though there is actually a reasonable explanation for this, as a lot of theaters did not meet a basic level of standard and would often display movies in a way that was not ideal, such as projecting onto a screen that is larger than the light source of the projector, which results in a darker picture. And one concern which led Kubrick to demanding a checkup was the fact that a lot of projectionists would not clean the aperture gate of their projector, which led to dust getting onto the film reel, which over time scratched it beyond repair. This often led to films getting scrapped after only 15 days of being shown, because the reel was too damaged. So in reality, Kubrick was only trying to ensure that his audience would be able to view his movies in ideal conditions, which is not an unreasonable thing to expect if you spent so long making them. And as someone who has been to some lackluster film screenings, I wished more directors and film studios would pay that much attention to how their movies are displayed. Fact number 8. One of Kubrick's unrealized dream projects was a biopic about the great French general and emperor Napoleon. He had sunk an incredible amount of time researching for the film, reading hundreds of books and cataloging each piece of data, boasting to have known everything from his food tastes to the weather of each day of battle. The film was, however, never meant to be, as after the lackluster box office returns of Sergei Bondarchuk's own biopic of Napoleon, Waterloo, no studio was willing to foot the bill for such a costly project, especially on a scale Kubrick planned for. Kubrick's obsession with Napoleon did not just extend to wanting to make a film about him, however, as he was known to have copied the general's behavior as well, eating dessert alongside his main course in imitation of Napoleon's dietary habits. He would even copy Napoleon's penchant for asking everyone he met with a barrage of questions to exhaust them, and also the general's method of keeping his subordinates off balance by rotating them in and out of favor, praising one for a period of time, then regarding them with icy stares later on, only then to praise them once again as a way of making sure they would spend too much time gaining his favor instead of plotting against him. Which, apart from being very strange, is also a reminder that working for him must have been quite an ordeal. Fact number 9. Accidents often happen while filming, and Kubrick was no exception, as while filming The Shining, the extensive lighting system he used produced so much heat that the studio burned down. And Kubrick just laughed at this, then had the entire thing rebuilt, despite the fact that he only needed a few close-ups to finish shooting. But besides stretching the film's shoot for a few months, something good did come out of this fire, as the next film to be shot in the same studio was Raiders of the Lost Ark. And Steven Spielberg and George Lucas used the fact that the studio needed rebuilding to raise its roof, giving them enough space for the Well of Souls set. Fact number 10. Kubrick's films were often a source of controversy, in particular A Clockwork Orange, which led to a media frenzy where it was blamed for an uptick in juvenile crime inspired by the movie's events. Most of the time it was of no concern to him, but he at one point saw fit to censor himself by keeping A Clockwork Orange from being seen in Britain. The reasons stem from several events during the filming of Barry Lyndon, which was initially to be made in Ireland. But during that time, the Irish Republican Army, or IRA, a paramilitary organization hell-bent on freeing Ireland from British rule and unifying their country, were engaged in a guerrilla war against Britain, and would carry out bombings, assassinations and ambushes against their enemies. And for one reason or another, they set their sights on Kubrick, due perhaps in some part to the presence of actors dressed as British military officers within their borders. He would receive death threats, something which had happened far too frequently after the release of A Clockwork Orange. So Kubrick would move the shoot to England, then had A Clockwork Orange withdrawn from circulation in Britain. Due to concern for his family's safety, it would remain unseen there until Kubrick's death in 1999. I want to thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this list, feel free to like and subscribe. And if any of you were unaware of any of these, or have any more obscure facts about Kubrick's life, then maybe write it down in the comments below.